I would like to ask David to explain his tweet related to Prop 13.
Or 15. Yeah.
Prop 15.
Yeah. So I saw that Mark Zuckerberg had contributed $11 million to try and convince the people of California to vote for this Prop 15, which is the largest property tax increase in California history. What it does is it chips away at Prop 13 by moving commercial property out of Prop 13. And it would then tax it on what's called fair market value as opposed to the cost basis of the property. It would have a lot of unfair consequences for property owners who've owned their commercial property for a long time. You know, if you're a small business and you've owned your store or whatever for 20, 30 years, all of a sudden your taxes are going to get reassessed at the new fair market value. But you know, I just think there's the larger prize though is that the California unions, the government workers unions want to chip away at Prop 13. This is the first salvo. First, they're going to strip out commercial property. Eventually, they want to basically repeal all of Prop 13. And I just think it's like so misguided for billionaires to be using their wealth in this way, because Prop 13 is really the shield of the middle class in California. And it's kind of no wonder that, frankly, like tech wealth is so increasingly despised in this country, because tech billionaires are funding such stupid causes.
To explain this to people who don't know, in California, if you bought your house in 1970 for $50,000, the 1% tax you pay on it is $500. That house might be worth $5 million today if it was in Atherton. And so you're still paying what would have been a $50,000 tax bill is a $500 tax bill. So they're starting with commercial spaces.
And Jason,
right,
sorry,
they will
Jason,
go backwards. Yeah.
And you can pass it off to your kids.
At that cost basis.
Yeah.
So this is why you have two old people living in a 5-bedroom.
Right.
It caps the rate increase of the tax increase every year.
If you didn't have Prop 13, no, hold on. If you didn't have Prop, let me just explain to people. If you didn't have Prop 13, anybody who's owned their house for say 20 years would have a massive tax bill all of a sudden, and probably would have to sell their house. Just about anybody who's middle class, who's been in California for more than a decade or two, probably could no longer afford to live in their house.
But the reality is people are mortgaging that asset tax to access capital that they're using and investing in different things, whether that's fueling the economy, right? So, I mean, the libertarian point of view might be less taxes is good because in this particular case, that building can still be used by that resident to buy stuff. They can take a mortgage out and they can go spend that money versus having that money eaten up by property taxes, which just goes to the government.
Yeah. So I understand that if you were to design the perfect tax policy, it wouldn't look like Prop 13 or maybe Prop 15 in a vacuum. If you're just like a policy wonk trying to design the ideal tax policy, it might look more like that. But the real problem in California, we're not an undertaxed state. It's a massively taxed state. And there's never enough. The beast always wants more. And so what I would say is, look, if you want to reform Prop 13, do it as part of a grand bargain that creates real structural reform in the state of California. What I mean by structural reform, well, you got to look at, who controls the system? And it's really the government employee unions who block all structural reform and who keep eating up a bigger and bigger portion of the state budget. So we've talked about this on previous pods, that the police unions block any kind of police reform. The prison unions block prison reform. You've got the teachers unions blocking education reform and school choice. If you want to talk about systemic problems in California, look at who runs the system. It's these gigantic unions, and a bigger and bigger portion of the budget keeps going to them every year. They're breaking the bank. And by the way, it doesn't get us more cops on the beat. It doesn't get us more teachers in the classroom. What it's buying is lots and lots more of administration, along with a bunch of pension fraud. And so what I would do is I would say, look, we need some structural reforms here. We need some caps on the rate of growth in spending. We need some pension reforms. In exchange for that, as part of a grand bargain, you might get some reforms to Prop 13. But just to give away one of the only cards we have in negotiating with these powerful special interests for no reason, I just think it's dumb.
Do you think that Zuck was tricked, or what do you think?
I think he's probably got, look, I don't really know, but I don't have anything against Zuck, and I've defended him on this podcast a lot, basically on the speech issue. But I think what it is, he's got some foundation and he's got some pointy-headed policy wonks sitting there trying to analyze what the perfect tax policy is. And it probably looks more like fair market value than like cost basis. And they're not thinking about the larger political sort of ramifications, which is the private sector is being squeezed more and more by these public employee unions, and we do need structural reform. And we can't just give up one of the only cards we have, which would be, trading reform on Prop 13.
And Zuck doesn't own any commercial real estate.
Yeah. Well, even if so, I don't.
And I would venture to guess that maybe Sachs does. I don't know. I mean,
no. Hold on. Let me. I do, but let me explain that. This doesn't affect me because my cost basis is fresh. Yeah, all the commercial real estate that I've bought in California has been in the last few years. It's probably underwater. I mean, it's certainly not above my cost basis. So it doesn't affect me. It affects the little guy. It affects the small business who's owned their property for 10 or 20 years. And again, I'm not arguing that we couldn't come up with a better tax system, but what I'm saying is the bigger, more pressing need is structural reform.
Totally. No, look, I totally agree. The bloated monster of socialism is coming for us, and it starts with the unions and it evolves, and it's just tax.
Average salary. I don't know if you saw this go viral in the last couple of weeks on Twitter.
SF.
Average salary in San Francisco, $170,000
for tech
workers,
city employees, yeah,
of city employees. I saw that like 170,000 was the average salary. I was like, oh wow, tech people are doing good. It was like, no, that's the city employees.
19,000 administrative employees in the city of San Francisco, a city of 800,000 people.
800,000 people
with a $14 billion budget.
The state of California is converting the entire middle class into government workers because if you're a small business owner, you're getting squeezed by more and more taxes. You're getting driven out of the state. People leaving the state now exceeds people immigrating into the state. So the private sector middle class is leaving, and this this sort of public sector middle class of government workers is being created. And like I mentioned, it's not getting us more cops on the beat. It's not getting us more teachers in the classroom. What it's getting is a giant number of overpaid administrators and bureaucrats. That is the big structural problem. The private sector unions are very different. You see, when a private sector union goes to negotiate, they go negotiate against ownership or management, and there's someone to oppose their unreasonable demands. Not all their demands are unreasonable, but just the most unreasonable demands. But with the public sector unions, they're negotiating against the politicians. And they are the largest contributors to those politicians. And so there's no one.
And the politicians need them for their votes, right? They're like, they're going to deliver whatever number of teachers, police officers.
Exactly. The unions feed the politicians, and the politicians feed the unions. That is a structural problem. And these unions the unions will never be appeased. You can never buy them off.
It's why democracy always ends in the state. Like it's just an inevitable outcome.
I had no idea about any of this until I'm glad I asked you about that tweet. That's really, I actually learned a lot just in that